Switching tack now, and climate change and the potential threat to Britain's future has been laid bare for the first time. A national assessment has highlighted 100 ways the UK could be adversely affected in the coming century. Dr Paul Toyne is Director of Global Sustainability at WSP. That's a consultancy group that advises on climate change. Paul, welcome. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
This is an attempt to assess how, on an everyday basis, in a sense, climate change will affect people. What are the headlines as you see them?
Well, I think first we should welcome this report because it does give us a kind of like robust methodology, which is really important. And it's been well reviewed by scientists, economists and various other bodies. But what the headlines are is that undoubtedly there are some winners and some losers. So if you look at the winners, well, maybe Britain will be a more attractive place to go on holiday, so tourism may well benefit.
People will live longer because the cold snaps won't kill them off in such numbers.
Well, another winner potentially could be the fact that our energy bills, which are very topical at the moment, may well be less in the winter. But then that may well be negated by another potential threat, which would be increased heat stress and our buildings overheating in the summer. And that will affect the very vulnerable, such as children and the elderly. And other winners may well be agriculture, because we could have increasing yields in our crops,
providing there's enough water. In the opposite way, yeah.
Well, I think that it's important to recognise that when we look out into 30 or 50 years' time, there will be changes, undoubtedly. Some of them could well be positive, so we have to consider what actions we should be taking to maximise those opportunities. Yeah. But then for the things that we perceive to be a threat to us, we need to start to manage those issues so that we can build in some flexibility and to adapt. So it's all about creating a resilient economy and a resilient communities on which people can live and thrive.
It's quite an interesting approach, this, because sometimes computer modelling and a jumble of numbers can fail to persuade in a way that perhaps tangible examples of how practically lives will be impacted is a much more powerful way of making people pay heed.
Yes, it is. I mean, you just have to look back in recent years and think about the impact of flooding has in Britain and the cost and disruption to people's lives.
People are always very careful to say we can't be sure, and that's the point to make, isn't it? Because flooding's always, there's nothing new about flooding, and that's the important point to make, isn't it? People will always say this may be a consequence of climate change. We can never say with complete copper-bottom conviction. It probably is, can't be absolutely sure.
What the science does tell us, though, is that we will have more extreme weather events.
Right.
So that's where the drought comes in the summer, where we might have warmer but wetter winters with more increased flash flooding. And so the flooding that we saw in York and Boscastle and places like that was set to increase. And you think about the disruption that has in our daily lives and our economy in terms of communities, roads being washed away, the disruption to businesses and their supply chains. And that's the thing that we have to start to plan for. And then we've got some global issues, such as sea level rises. And, this isn't anything, the outcomes of this study don't necessarily tell us anything new. So we did know that we will have to adapt and start to plan for some of these impacts. And for example, in London, we're already doing that. There's been tremendous investment in the flood defence for London to cope with sea level rises, as well as the flash flooding that could arise in the Thames Basin.
As you say, it's those extreme fluctuations in weather, isn't it? I just wonder about this winter. I mean, we've obviously been doing a lot of stories about what a mild winter it's been. Anecdotally, just in terms of talking to people, people seem genuinely spooked this winter in a way that perhaps hitherto they haven't always by changes in climate. This sense of stuff happening out there, from the bulbs pushing through in December to insects that aren't killed off by cold snaps. This mild winter's made people really scratch their heads and think, crikey, it's coming.
Yes, and it's very interesting for me when we talk to businesses who are wanting to understand the level of disruption that can happen to their supply chain, or when we speak to governments who are concerned about how to adapt to a changing climate, having that certainty to say this is always going to happen. And trying to dissociate the fact that what happens on a daily basis is our weather, but what happens on a long-term basis is our climate. And trying to get that level of understanding across is a challenge. But what I think this report does do is tell us that we should start to be thinking about how we prioritise to plan for a changing future. And how do we create a more resilient economy and community?
Okay. Paul Toyne from the WS Group. Thanks very much indeed. This is Sky News coming up. 6,000 new jobs at the sandwich chain Subway. Are they the kinds of jobs that we need? We'll discuss.